If you need to take a design from this to this, then keep watching because I'm going to show you how to do it with Adobe Illustrator. My name is Liz, and if you're new here, I've been a graphic designer for over 10 years. And today I want to talk about something that I've noticed has been coming up quite frequently with the introduction of tools like Canva and AI-generated graphics. First, I'll start off by saying that there's a lot of free and paid tools out there that promise to vectorize a logo for you, and some of them work pretty well, but others miss the mark entirely. So in this video, I want to take it back to basics and show you how to recreate a logo the old-fashioned way using Adobe Illustrator. So for today's example, I created this quick logo for a fake sales kickoff meeting. It has some pretty basic design elements, a couple of different colors, and some typography. This could have come to you from one of your project owners. Maybe they worked with an agency and all they have is a PNG version of the logo, or you created this in Canva yourself and now you need to vectorize it so that you can use it for other use cases like retractable banners or merch or something of that nature. So when you open your logo file, you'll notice that the artboard is automatically sized to the original graphic that you had. And the first thing that you're going to want to do is actually just lock down this image so that it doesn't move around. So you can see if I click here, I'm able to move this original graphic, and we don't really want that as we're going to be working over top of it. We want it to stay in the same place. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is go up to Object and then down to Lock. And this is going to lock the selection, the graphic that you have opened in Adobe Illustrator. And now you can see when I try to click around and move it, it doesn't move. It just stays in the one spot for us and it won't get in the way when you start to lay down vectors. Now, the first question you may have asked yourself is, what is a vector and why do I need a vector file for my logo in order to reproduce it? And a vector is essentially a series of lines and points that make up your artwork instead of pixels that just color your artwork. So think of it as this star here on our canvas. Each one of these points, or anchors as they're known in Illustrator, is known as a vector. Altogether, these points make up the star, and you're able to then scale up and scale down without having to worry about changing the quality of your artwork. If this star was just a flat PNG made out of pixels, the larger I made it, the more the pixels would have to stretch. And that's when you see the blurring, quality loss, and really like downgrading the integrity of the graphic. So with my pen tool selected, let's jump right into it. The first thing that you're going to do in order to recreate and start making your vectors is to just go along the outside of your mountain and those trees and start to create the exact shape around them that you see. So I'm going to just go ahead and start doing that. I'll start up here at the top of the mountain and I'll click once. You can see I've already laid down a small blue anchor. And now you can see as I go down to the next point to keep things as straight as I can, I already have this visual line of where the line is going to connect both points, just to kind of show me what to expect where I'm clicking. I'm going to go down here to the next point and I'm going to click. And now I have a line that leads from the top of the mountain down to where the first tree is. If I zoom in a little bit more here, now we can start to see that there's a little bit of shape, a little bit of curve underneath each branch in this evergreen tree. And I'm going to show you how to make a curve. So if I zoom in a little bit farther, which is Command plus, by the way, a hotkey for you when you're zooming in and out of an artboard on Illustrator, Command minus is zoom out and Command plus is zoom in if you're on a Mac. Now I want to get from this bottom anchor here up to this first branch of my evergreen tree. And it actually looks like this one is pretty straight. So I'm going to go ahead and add my third anchor point here. You'll notice that it automatically just filled in for me the space between my anchors. And so to fix that and to take that off, I'm actually going to go over here to the left navigation bar at the very bottom this is going to be where I can control the fill and the border of my line. So if you're familiar with PowerPoint or even I think Microsoft Word, you'll know that when you want to fill something with color versus when you want to create a border of it with your color. So the square here with a smaller square on the inside of it represents your border. So that's also known as a stroke, or basically the line of your graphic in Illustrator. The filled in square here is basically talking about the fill. So if I have my line with a solid white fill, obviously anywhere that I create shapes, it's going to fill it in with that color. Now, if I wanted to not have a fill and be transparent and just be a line, I can go ahead and click the red dash button right down. I'm gonna try to like magnify this for you guys so you can see it if it's a little bit small. But I'm going to just click the line through, and you can see that it immediately took the fill off. It's essentially canceling out the fill. But now I won't really be able to see much of anything because my border also has that red line through it. So I'm going to go ahead and click this square inside of a square, also known as the line or the border or the stroke. And I'm going to go ahead and choose a color in this color wheel. Magenta is really easy to stand out from the background, so for me, that's the one that I've always used. And now you can see in my color area of the navigation pane, I have my magenta in the stroke, and then my fill is actually just X'd out, so there's no fill. Let's start on our first curve. It's really straightforward. I'm just going to go out to the edge of this tree here, just like I normally would. And you can kind of see already, as we're zoomed in, the line that we're creating has sharp edges, it looks really clean, whereas the original image, now that we've zoomed in and forced it to scale larger, you can see the variation in the pixels of not being able to zoom in quite as much as our vectors. So that just kind of shows you how the integrity of the graphic starts to break down when it's only a flat PNG versus being a vector file. To make this first curve, I'm going to go ahead and click and hold our click, and now drag up the anchor just a little bit so you can see that my line is now starting to bend. So I'm going to do my best to outline and keep this line along the same curve as that branch. So now we've got a bit of an issue. Now that I'm going up to click my next anchor, I can see that my preview line is still holding that curve and not aligning to where this newest curve is. This is a trick that I use. I don't know how many other people do this, or maybe there's a better hotkey to get rid of this. But in order for me to fix this bend, I basically will just go up here to the selection tool, and then I go back down to the pen tool. I click here on where my anchor was, and then I can start fresh. And it's no longer holding that curve as it was before. So like I said, just hover over the selection arrow, click the selection arrow, and then go back to the pen tool, and it's basically resetting the pen tool so that it's not holding that same curve that you were using for the downslope of the previous branch. So I'm going to do the same thing here because as you can see, it's not a straight line. We've got another curve. So I'm just going to go ahead and click and then gently curve that so that it matches. And so I'm going to do that for the rest of the tree here, and then I'll meet you back here for the next step. Okay, so now that we have our first tree down, you can see that some of our points look really dramatic. Like this one up at the top here, this is actually starting to look almost like a paintbrush at the top as opposed to a nice rounded top of the tree. So in order to make this more closely match the original and make sure that there's no overspill of the corners, we're going to go over here to the cap and corner in our stroke window. And if you don't automatically see your stroke window, you can go up to window and then scroll down to where you see stroke. So this is where you're going to control a lot of different elements about what your line looks like, whether it's a dashed line, whether it has arrows, whether it's, very thick or thin. It controls the weight of it. But for this instance, what we're going to fix is actually the cap in the corner of our line. So you can see cap and corner here. Right now we are on the settings of a hard edge. So you can see this rectangle here, it's cut off, it's got hard angles. The second option is actually a curvature around the point of your line. So instead of being rigid and structured, it's actually going to curve and round the tops of every one of your points so that it's not so harsh. And the same thing for like a corner where two lines are meeting. We don't want them to be super straight. We want them to have a little bit of a nice curve on them. So watch what happens. I will zoom in to that same area of the tree. And when I hit the rounded corner for cap and the rounded corner for where the two ends meet, the two lines meet, now we have this really nice polished corner instead of having that sloppy overflow of the 2 points, which is a totally different aesthetic. If you're going that way, no hate. But this will give you closer to your original and probably what you were thinking. And you can even see the lower branches here are starting to look a little more polished as well. It kind of just stops that overflow entirely and makes it look a little closer to our original image. So we've got another tree to do, and I'm not gonna blab the whole time that I'm doing it. So I'm gonna start the other tree and then we'll meet back here. Okay, second tree is done. So now what we're gonna do is keep the whole line one long continuous line for this mountain. You can see that we've got a bit of a curve here with the road. It goes all the way over here and then starts to make its way back up. Don't worry too much about this snow piece in the middle. I will show you how to do that in just a little bit. But first, let's just keep going and outline the rest of the mountain. Here's another quick tip for you. If you hold down the Shift key when you're going to place your next anchor, it's actually going to adhere to angles. So if I wanted to make a completely straight line that matches where the other anchor is on the board, I'm gonna hold down Shift while I drag over to my next anchor point, and that you can trust that that straight line is exactly the same angle from this anchor to this anchor, or these two vectors. So that's just a quick tip. You'll probably start to use the Shift key a lot if you get into Adobe Illustrator, because it's a big help for things like that. So remember to get from one anchor point to the next anchor point in a perfectly straight line across your artboard. Hold down the Shift key. Okay, so now that we've outlined the whole mountain, it's time to do a couple of touch-ups where the angles need to be a little less pointed. So if we zoom in to the top of the mountain, for example, we can see that even though the cap and the corner are rounded, we're actually leaning off the top of the mountain a little bit. So in order to make this one point a little more curved, there's actually a tool built in that helps to do that for one anchor point. So I'm going to take my white selection tool, which is different than the black selection tool. The white selection tool focuses specifically on each anchor point between two lines. So I'm going to take the white selection tool and click the anchor that I need to smooth over. So once I click that anchor, it's going to deselect all of the other anchors in my line, and I can come here to this tiny little circle underneath the anchor point. And if I click it and start to drag down, you can see that the top of my mountain is starting to curve into 2 points instead of 1. So you're able to gently pull down the top of that mountain so that it fits a little bit more to the curve. I'm going to do that again over here where there's another point and just give it a little bit of a curve, and then up here. So it works both ways if you want to curve down or curve up, depending on the angles of your lines already. So if I have this one here, I can go ahead and just pull it out a little bit to make that corner a little less harsh. Okay, we can already see the difference now. So now there's a bunch of anchor points on the mountain that we just outlined, including those 2 trees and the road that's leading back. Now I want to make sure that we don't forget about the inside part of that snow that's sitting on top of the mountain. So even though this is not part of our original line, we're actually going to just make another one here by clicking the pen tool. Great. Let's do the other mountain right behind it. Okay, so we've run into our next problem. So the anchor in the background of this mountain here actually goes behind the mountain in front of it, and there's another anchor in the way. In order to continue our line and not bother the line of the other mountain, it's pretty easy. You're just going to go past it and then click up to the next one. You may have to do it a couple of times to get the angle exactly right, but once you do, you'll see that it's just going to sit the line on top of it. If you were to accidentally connect to the anchor of the other mountain in the line, it's going to make both of those lines join together, which you don't really want if you want to control the colors and keep these as 2 separate objects. So overshoot the next anchor, and then we'll worry about cleaning it up later on. I'll show you how. But now that I've got my anchor moving here, I'll just go ahead and connect it twice more. I'm just going to go ahead and same thing. I'm going to select multiple peaks of the mountain, and I'm going to give them a nice curve using that curve selection. Same thing with the bottom slopes. I'm going to give those a little bit of a curve so that it's not just like hard pressed corners of the mountain. Now that you've got both mountains done, it's time to move on to the sun. And we're actually going to use a different couple of tools for the sun, given that it is a circular object and that there's lines involved. So I'm going to show you another trick that doesn't involve the pen tool and is actually kind of faster than using the pen tool. So as we're looking at the sun, we notice that it's a nice circular shape or an ellipse in Illustrator. And each one of these sun rays is just a straight line. So these can be handled a little bit differently than the pen tools. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my ellipse tool in the navigation bar on the left-hand side. This will, by default, show up as the rectangular tool, but essentially it's called the shape tool. So we're going to go into the shape tool and we're going to select the ellipse. I usually like to try to predict where the top corner of a circle would be when I lay down the first click, but we're going to hold the shift key and then we're going to click and start to drag out an ellipse. So as long as you're holding the shift key, the circle is not going to change its orientation. So it's going to be the same circumference. It's going to be an equal, perfect circle. If I was to do this without holding down the shift, then my circle can move and change shape and width freely. So if you want to make a perfect circle, it's going to be shift and then click and drag. And so you can pretty much eyeball the basic size as closely as you can to the sun, and then use your black selection tool to move it so that it's pretty much in the center. And you can see that there's a little bit of space on both sides of my ellipse. So I'm going to actually take a corner down on the left-hand side or whichever corner you prefer, I'm gonna, again, hold down Shift and click that side of the bounding box, and you can see now I can resize my shape so that it fits a little bit closer to that shape of the sun. So now that that's there, I know we're overlapping with the mountains, but we're just going to leave it for now. It'll all make sense a little bit later when we add color, like I said, with the first and second mountains. But just to get the general outline down of where the sun would be behind the mountains, this is a great start. Next, we're gonna handle each one of these sun rays. So again, we're gonna go back to the shape tool and then down to the line segment tool, which is technically a shape in its own way. It's just a straight line from one anchor to another. So I'm gonna zoom in so you can see this. So this is one of the sun rays. With this line tool, I'm going to do my best to meet the middle center top of the sun ray. I'm going to click, and then I'm gonna hold down my mouse button, and I'm going to drag the other side down to the other part of the sun ray. Now, if you need to readjust this, like I think I do for that left corner there, you can go back to your white selection tool and hit this one anchor here. See how it's coloring in this one anchor for me versus this other anchor that's still white. That means that this one is selected. So if I select that one, I can just move it super freely. So I've got that. Maybe now I'll make sure that it's a little bit more close to the actual angle of the line, but now we can see that it's not wide enough. So this is a nice skinny little line that we were working with to outline other objects. But what we're going to do is add width to this line until it meets the exact width of the sun ray. So over here in my stroke window again, I'm going to just click up the width until it meets about the same width of the sun ray. As you just watched, we totally grew outside of the length of the actual sun ray. So you may need to go back in and do the same thing we did before and just bring those anchor points in just a little bit so that it matches closely to that sun ray. So instead of doing that same process for every single sun ray, what I'm gonna do now is just take the black selection tool, and then I'm gonna copy and paste this sun ray. Now I use the hotkey Command C, Command V for copy and paste on a Mac. On a Windows PC, I'm not exactly sure what the hotkey is, but I'll go ahead and hit Command C and then Command V. And just like when you do it on PowerPoint, you'll notice that it just kind of drops it anywhere on close by. So I can go ahead and select that. And now obviously, again, we're looking at this and it's not the same angle as this sun ray is here. So back to the white selection tool, we're gonna go ahead and hit anchor, and we're gonna just bring that down exactly where it should be. And we'll do that for the remaining sun rays. Great, you've got all of your sun rays on the sun. So for this instance, we're actually going to do something special for the sun rays that's different than what we've been doing with the other shapes. So I'm going to select all of them. And you can see my bounding box growing, just like with PowerPoint or whatever other programs you're used to doing. Now I have a whole bounding box of my sun rays, and I'm going to go up to Object and down to Path. Because basically what we're creating is a series of paths using the lines and the anchors. What's in between them is the path. So that's what Illustrator is calling them. So we're down in Path, and we're going to go Outline Stroke. So now you can see when I zoom in that we're no longer working with just one single line that has some padding on it. Now we're working with a full line outline with different anchors. I go over to the anchor here. Now, instead of having just 2 anchors from the top and bottom, we have 3 on each of the sides and even 4 down here to accommodate the curve of that bottom. So you can see now we have the ability to change the corners of these. We can move this anchor way out here if we wanted to, but this is now a singular shape instead of just being a path or a line. All right, so now we have the top half of our logo recreated. Let's move on to the text below before we start coloring everything in. Let's focus first on this word summit. So this is the theme of my imaginary event. One caveat about generated images, if you're using ChatGPT or a similar product, they don't use commercial fonts. They use a replication of commercial fonts. So if you were to ask ChatGPT, what font did you use for this word, it's going to tell you that it doesn't have an exact match. What it will tell you is things that it based this off of. And in this case, it was Montserrat. So to save yourself some time and not have to go through penning every single one of these letters and maybe not getting it completely accurate, I would encourage you to try to find a font that most closely matches this. There's also a ton of font finders online. If you go to Google and type in what the font, that's I think one of them, or there's a couple of others that allow you to upload your image and select the text that you're trying to identify, and it will then give you a list of possibilities of which font it could be. So I already happen to know that this font is really close to the font Montserrat. So what we're going to do is actually type out the word summit in Montserrat and see how closely we can match to the original. We're going to start with the type tool, and that's down here about halfway down your navigation bar on the left-hand side. So we're going to click on the text tool, and then what we're going to do is drag a bounding box around that word. Now you're going to see chaos ensue. This is lorem ipsum. It is basically a filler text in Latin for all of Adobe's products. Basically, it fills in the entire text box with dummy text so that you can see what font is being used, and it fills it in as sort of like placeholder text. The first thing I'm going to do is type in summit. So my text is already set to Montserrat as a font, but if you were to open Illustrator for the first time and you're recreating this logo for the first time using the program, Adobe defaults to Myriad as its font. So I'll show you what that looks like. So Myriad is a default font. There's a ton of different weights to it. So I think it'll probably default to Myriad Pro, which you can see just visually is a lot thinner than Montserrat. So you'll know right away if you're not on the right font. I'm going to go ahead and type back in Montserrat. And this looks to me like it's bold. This looks the closest to the summit that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And then what I'm going to do is just bring up the size of the font, of the text. Don't worry if it's not perfect, because we're going to move it around. So now that I have my text laid down, I'm going to go ahead and right click, and I'm going to choose Create Outlines. So basically what this is going to do is change the text from being text to a shape. So now we can resize this. If I pull it to the top right corner, I can hold down Shift again and start to pull the text a little bit larger so that the top of the text and the bottom of the text align as closely as I can with the original piece under it. So you can see there's a little bit of variation here between the S and that might be due to the AI generated text or whatever we had to work with. Like I said, Chat does not use commercial fonts. So it probably looked at Montserrat and tried to do something as close as it could without infringing on any copyright or font permissions. But that's okay, we can change that as well. So now that I've got my summit text in Montserrat, bold, it's pretty much the same size as the one underneath it, and I've outlined it. Now I can move each one of these pieces to be exactly over where it is in the logo. So if I now take my outlined text and I ungroup it, because right now it's looking at summit as one full word as a group. But if I ungroup that, I can now move each letter without affecting the rest of the word. So I've gone ahead and ungrouped it. Now I'm going to select each one and I'm just going to pull it over to where it is on the graphic. Now, like I said, you might need to mess with some sizing a little bit once you get it to where it needs to be so that it's as close as possible. But you want to keep everything in a straight line. Use the shift drag method that we used for the anchors earlier on to make sure it goes in a straight line and it doesn't get out of balance. And everything is remaining on the same line. That's really important for logo development. So now that I'm looking at my outlined text, I'm actually going to change it to that magenta so that we can see the differences. So we can see there are some subtle differences between the original down there from this chat generated image and what the actual font allows. Now, it depends on how precise you want to get. If you want to use Montserrat and you don't mind the way that the S looks, then you can totally move past this point and just use Montserrat for the rest of your branding or other elements and not worry about the custom shaping like we have in this graphic here. However, if this is a big part of your brand and you really just want to go as close as you can to what was generated or what you originally came up with, you can treat these characters exactly as you would the other shapes like the mountain and the sun. So now that they're outlined, we can see that they too have anchors and vectors. And so if I wanted to make sure that this curve of the S matches exactly the way that it was originally created, I can go ahead and take one anchor and pull it over and then use a handle to fix each point so that it's perfectly aligned with what was originally created. We didn't really go over the handles earlier, but if you lay down an anchor here, you'll see this little antenna sticking off of it. If you click this handle, you can change your curvature without having to move your anchor. And it actually really comes in handy on occasion. So you can do that, and then you can get a little bit closer to the exact positioning of where each of these letters is. And we can go down here and do it again with this bottom one. And just alter it a bit so that it's absolutely perfect. If you want to try to get as close as you can to that original S without just being regular Montserrat. All right, moving along, we can see that the U is a little bit off. We can start to bring these out a little bit, make them a little bit thinner. Same thing with the M here. We can bring all of these anchors in so that it's a little bit closer. But again, you might like the way Montserrat looks without having to make all of these small detail changes. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that our M's are exactly alike by just copying and pasting. But some people really want it to be exactly the way that it was generated or exactly the way that it was originally created. So making some of these custom changes here are going to make sure that you have an exact replica. Great. So now we have Summit written out. And so we're just going to leave it in magenta and we're going to recolor everything at the end. But for now, let's just leave them that way and start to do the same thing for sales kickoff. Okay, I'm going to knock this one down to, I think, semi-bold because it looks visually like this subheader text is a little bit thinner than Summit. So we'll just step down a little bit in the font weight. You can see Montserrat has a ton of different font weights depending on how thick you want the font itself. So we're going to move down to semi-bold. And then it also looks like there's a bit of space in between each letter, also known as kerning. So we're going to increase the kerning and just make sure that we align a little bit closer. Select all of my text, and then I'm going to hold down Option and I'm going to hit the right directional arrow, and it's going to increase that space in between my characters equally. So if I was to try to go in there and move each one, like I did with Summit, with one word, it's a little bit more manageable. With an entire line of text, you want everything to be perfectly spaced. So hold down Option and then go ahead and try to match as closely as you can. You can also increase the text size to see how close you are. And it looks pretty close. I'll probably move it in just a little bit more. All right, here's another tip. There is a very small baby antenna on the right side of your text box. I don't think antenna is the technical term, but I think it always looks like a little antenna of a ladybug or something. But this is basically so that you can change the way that the bounding box interacts with your text. So if I double click this now, you can see that my bounding box just went inward to more precisely box in my text. And now that the little antenna is white, when I move this and drag a corner, it's going to automatically reshape the text. So if I align this a little more closely to the actual size of the subheader, you can see that I sort of overshot my kerning. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Option, and then I'm going to bring it back in so that it's almost perfect. If there are a couple of letters that are off enough, you can go ahead and do it piece by piece and pull them in that way. Hold down Option and move the directional areas when you're hovered over one letter or number, and it's going to only move in that area. So now you can see that we have sales kickoff. If I pull this down a little bit, it looks like Montserrat is close, but not exactly precise to what was originally created. So again, you can go in and go ahead and create outlines so that we have some anchors to work with. Then if we zoom in, we can see that the 7 is really not the same as the original 7. So we can bring it back up. Maybe make it a little bit bigger. And just start to move things a little more precisely. Now for the 7, we are actually going to take both of these bottom anchors where the 7 is sort of overlapping where it shouldn't be, and we're going to select both of them. You can select more than one anchor by holding Shift. Remember I told you Shift is going to be really important in Illustrator. So I'm going to select one, I'm going to hold Shift, and I'm going to click the other anchor, and then I'm going to pull it up so that it is perfectly matched. And then I'm going to pull these in. And so now if you zoom all the way in, you'll notice that there's a little bit of a discrepancy on where these two anchors are. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to click and drag a small box around these two anchors, because now there's 2. Since I brought up 2 from the bottom, now there's an extra 2. I'm going to just delete those anchors entirely. And you may not see a visual difference here, but they're gone, which means that this anchor on the right-hand side and this anchor on the left-hand side are now open. There's nothing connecting them like a bridge. So in order to fix that and create one simultaneous line between the anchor points, I'm going to click this anchor, and then I'm going to go click its neighbor. And then I'm going to right click and click Join. So now you can see that those curvature features pop up. You can see that there's a line stretching between one anchor to another, and they're connected, they're safe. They're not just open in the wild. So now if I wanted to reselect both of them, I can start to bring it even closer to match the way that the 7 is. Great. So, like I said before, if you want to be very specific and mimic exactly the way that this logo was, down to the font, you can go ahead and start to manipulate all of the letters to make sure that they are perfectly aligning with where it is on the original graphic. Or if you want to just stick with Montserrat and you're happy with how close that is, you can move on. Now, if it was me and I had creative freedom, maybe I'm building out my brand guidelines or I'm building a brand system for myself, but I don't have very restricted boundaries on what I'm able to do, I would probably just stick with Montserrat when I'm recreating the text here, even though it doesn't directly match the generated image. If you think about what we talked about before, how AI doesn't generate with commercial fonts, it's not going to be another font that you see in the wild somewhere. So it's probably better to create your brand guidelines using a font that you have or a commercial font that you've bought. And then later on, if you're working with AI generation, oftentimes you can provide the font file and instruct your AI to only use your font file based on your brand guidelines. I would probably just build into my brand system that Montserrat bold or Montserrat semi-bold is a part of everything else that we're going to be doing, instead of just trying to like match it to whatever is generated every time. Now you'll see that we just have these lines here on either side of the sales kickoff subheader to fill in, and we pretty much have vectors of the entire logo. So go ahead and do that. It should remind you of the sun rays that we created. Just start from one end to the other. Go ahead and bump up the weight, round those corners, readjust a little bit. Once you're happy with the left-hand side, I would recommend going up to Object, go to Path, and outline it just like we did for the sun rays. And now what I'm going to do is click Copy and then Paste in Place. And so this, instead of in PowerPoint, when you click Copy Paste, it pastes the element somewhere else. This is actually just pasting it in the exact same place that it is right now, which is going to be important because what we want is for both of these lines to stay on the exact same coordinates of the artboard. So now that I have it pasted in the exact same place, I can click, hold Shift, and drag it all the way over to where we need it to be. As long as you're holding Shift while you drag it, it's only going to go perfectly to the right on the same line. If I was to just click it and pull it over, there's a very, very likely chance that it's not going to be on the exact same line as your other one, and you don't want that to be uneven. So now that we have everything roughly outlined, it's time to colorize and add specific details to make sure that our logo transfers over everywhere that we need. So what I'm going to do is start from the very beginning mountain, and I'm going to run through colorizing everything so that it matches exactly what your colors are of the original graphic. And I will caveat to say that everybody has their own order of things that they do in. I'm just sharing with you what I typically do to recreate a logo. I'm sure there's plenty of designers out there who could be watching this and say, there's an easier way to do it, or there's a different way to do it. But the great thing about design is that there's a million paths to get to one destination. If your order is to do everything in the same color all together at once, that's great. The way that my brain works best with making sure I don't leave anything out and visually seeing the design come into a vectorized life, this is basically how I've done it for a really long time. So now that that's out of the way, let's go back to mountain number 1. So the first thing that I'm going to explain to you is how to color pick each one of these colors. Again, if you have brand guidelines that specify what color yellow, what color light blue, and what color navy you need to be using, then I would track those down and only use those colors. Brand guidelines are there for a reason, and they're very important. So if you have brand guidelines, go by the colors of your brand guidelines. If this is a brand new theme that you're developing, you maybe got this image that your coworker generated and wants the whole design to be based off of, but they don't have any guidelines for you on color. You're kind of starting fresh. So if you're creating a digital piece, you have a little bit of wiggle room with the colors that you're allowed to do. So I'm going to show you how to find the colors and how to then transfer them into your new outline. The first thing I'm going to do for our mountain color in the front here is I'm going to choose the eyedropper over on the left-hand side. And you're going to hover over the color that you want. A lot of us might be familiar with this from an Instagram story where you can eyedrop a piece of your picture and your text changes to that color. There's a lot of different instances where eyedroppers come up, even in PowerPoint, Canva, all of them. So you might already be familiar with this. But we're going to go ahead and eyedrop on that navy blue that we have. I'm going to open up the color panel, and the way that I usually would do this if it wasn't already open is I'm going to double click on that fill box that we looked at earlier. And now you're going to get an overview of what this looks like between RGB, CMYK, and hex color. So a hex code, or a hexadecimal color code, is a 6-digit code that starts with the pound or a hashtag, depending on when you were born, that specifies a specific color in digital graphics. Basically, it's describing what the RGB color tones are up here. CMYK, this whole area here, is really based on print production. I will say that over the years, RGB to CMYK, basically digital to print conversion, has gotten so much better in printing. But if you, again, have brand guidelines that specify an exact CMYK color for printing or a Pantone book color, then you should definitely use those. But what I'm going to do in this instance is just copy down the hex code, or the hexadecimal color code right here, which is pound 103249. And I'm going to note this down. Sometimes I write it on a piece of paper. Or if you want to start to build out a brand guide for your summit kickoff meeting, this is where you would copy down this information so that everybody else or yourself, when you make a graphic for this event, is going to use the same color blue every time. So I'm going to go ahead and use the old school method of writing it down on a piece of paper, just in case I need it again later on for the text. Okay, now that I've got that color down, I'm going to do the same thing with the lighter color blue. I'm going to use the eyedropper. I'm going to do the same thing for the sun. And since there's only 3 colors in this logo, that's all I need to do. I don't need to know the magenta color because that's not going to be there when we're done. The first thing that we need to do before we color in this first mountain is to make this snow a part of this element. So I'm going to select the snow, I'm going to select the mountain, and I'm going to right click and choose Make Compound Path. I know a lot didn't happen visually, but now when I move my mountain around, you can see that the vector is actually taking into account that snow as opposed to being separate lines. So when you create a compound path, you're basically telling the system that you want there to be a breakup in the shape according to whatever shape you've built in. Now that I have my snow essentially cut out of my shape, all I have to do is go to the outline. I'm going to remove that magenta color, and then I'm going to go to the fill, and I'm going to fill in 103249. All right, so again, not a huge visual change, but when I move the mountain up, now you can see that our vector has filled in with that color blue. This part's going to get a little tricky, so follow me here and also rewind it and watch it again if you need more help. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to move this mountain to the forefront. So I'm going to arrange and bring to front. This way, the circle that we created for the sun is no longer confusing me or wrapping in front of my mountain, and I have a better understanding of what that looks like. So I'm going to now double click on the mountain so that I isolate it from everything else. And then I'm going to click the outside path first, and I'm going to add a stroke or a border to my shape. Same thing as when you've been working in PowerPoint, you can add a shape or a border around in the format panel. It's really similar to the way that you do this in Illustrator. So with my object selected, I'm going to go to my stroke window, and I'm going to add a weight, and you can see that it fills in automatically with the magenta. But you can see that it's starting to intrude on the inside of my shape. And really what I'm trying to accomplish is this outer line of white that separates both mountains and the sun. So what I'm going to do is go down to Align Stroke, and I'm going to click this third option here, which basically tells Illustrator, I don't want my stroke to perfectly outline the line. I want it to build out from my line. So I'm going to add a little bit more bulk to this so that you can see what I mean. It looks really crazy right now. But what I'm going to do is change it, the Align Stroke, to be on the outside. Boom. You see what I mean? So now we've got this stroke building outside of my object instead of through the original line that we created. And corner, make them rounded. Don't worry if it looks a little crazy, we're still getting there. And we are going to maybe add a little bit more so that it matches. Again, the whole name of the game is to match what was there before, right? So now my magenta is overlapping with the outside of that white line that separates the mountains and the sun. Okay, so the next step from here is we're going to go to Object, Path, and we're going to outline the stroke again. So go ahead and outline it. And now you'll notice that we have a line that's on the outside and a line that's on the inside. And we can manipulate those now. So now that we've outlined the stroke, we can go in and double click. And change this back to white. All right, and now if we click off, you can see that we have the white outline. It's not invading the snow. There's a couple of little anchor pieces that you can delete if you want to. Now you can see that we have a white outline that sits just outside of the main mountain here. There's a couple of adjustments that we should make so that no matter where this logo is laid down, it's going to look as anticipated. For example, if you look down at the road or the river, whatever this is supposed to be, I think it's a road, you can see that we now have this curve inward that we don't necessarily want. We want the road to be nice and smooth the whole way, regardless of what color background our logo's on, and we want it to match the original. So we're going to go ahead and zoom in and select all of those anchor points and then just delete. So now that those are gone, we can go in and connect one anchor to the other. And you're starting to see a pattern here, I hope. You want the anchors to be closed. Joining the anchors helps keep the integrity of the graphic. And now we have this great outline around our mountain. Okay, this next part is a little bit technical, so bear with me. What we're gonna do is remove the stroke where we don't need it in the original design. So in order to do that, we're going to actually use a really cool tool called the Generative Shape tool. This is pretty new, relatively new in the Adobe ecosystem. This came out a few years ago, maybe more now. But basically what this does is allows you to manipulate specific shapes based on the vectors or the lines and paths that make it up. So if we want to remove the stroke on the outside of the mountain and only keep the stroke where it's outlining in the sun and in front of this mountain, we're going to select all three. And now you can see in the blue outlines where there's specific separations between each one of these lines. And those are going to be really helpful for us. So go over to the generative shape tool. It's about halfway down on the left-hand navigation. Click the tool and then hover around the varying pieces. So you can see that this tool is incredibly smart. It's going to pick up separate pieces of your shapes based on what's overlapping it. So I'm going to select my generative shape tool, and then I'm going to hold down Option and just hover over the stroke that I don't want around the mountain. So that includes what's around the trees there, the bottom part, and then I'm just going to click and it goes away. It's like magic. Perfect. Now we're going to move over and do the same thing for the mountain in the background. Okay, still with me? I hope you rewinded and rewatched if you need more guidance on working with the mountains, but we're going to move on to finishing off the sun. So the sun rays are going to be really easy because they're already outlined and we just have to change the color so that it matches a yellow. So we're going to go ahead and select all of the sun rays, and we're going to type in E4A053, and it's going to automatically change them for us. And then we're going to do the same thing for our circle that represented the inner core of the sun. Easy. So now all we have to do is click the sun and start to send it backward behind our mountains. So you'll right click, go down to arrange and hit send backwards. I think you have to do it twice, maybe more times than that. Okay, so it's like a bajillion times, but basically just keep sending the sun backward until it's behind both of your mountains. And we're starting to now see the shape of the original coming through. So now that the top of the graphic is pretty much done, it's really easy. We'll just go down to Summit. We'll select all of these letters, change it to our navy blue. The bottom subheader text was in that lighter gray or light blue, depending on what you see first. 8.4, and then these magenta lines, will change them as well. Awesome. So now it's time to check our work. So if we zoom out a little bit, give ourselves some room, now we can select the whole graphic by clicking and dragging, just like you would in a PowerPoint. And we will hold Shift and pull our logo over to the side. And now you have a direct vectorized logo of your original Summit Sales Kickoff 2027 logo. All right, if you've made it this far in the video, first of all, I really appreciate you. And second of all, I hope that you learned a thing or two in Adobe Illustrator. Before we move on to really test and make sure that we vectorize the logo, if you could hit like and subscribe, that would be great. I'm a super new channel and I love to talk about design. So if you found this video helpful and you might want more design tips for beginners in the future, I would love to continue making them. So go ahead and hit that button for me. That would be awesome. Let's check out our newly vectorized logo next to the flattened PNG. So on the left-hand side is our original graphic that we had to work with. And on the right side is our vectorized logo. And I want to show you guys something really cool that really shows you what the difference is between a vectorized logo and a flat PNG. And so basically, if I go up to the view in the top navigation and go down to outline, we're going to see some major differences here. Where'd the other one go? So this just kind of shows you in an outline only format what a vectorized logo is. So the one that we created on the right hand side, that is the actual lines that we used in order to create this image. On the right hand side, there's nothing because there's no lines on the flat PNG. So a vectorized logo will basically have every detail built into it, so that you can easily size it up, size it down, without changing anything about the image itself. Leave a comment below if you have tried to vectorize your own logo using Adobe Illustrator, or if you have a logo or a graphic that you need vectorized, comment below and I'll try to help you out. Would love your feedback as a new YouTube creator in the space. I love to work in design and create new things, so I'm going to just continue to make little videos like this, and hopefully it helps you. I will catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.